Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to our online audience. My name is Tom Curran. I'm the head of the advisory services in Teagasc. We're very tight on time, so we're going to get straight into it. I just want to remind people that the conference is recorded as well. In this session, which is the third session of the day, we'll hear from three speakers. First of all, from Trevor Donnellan, who will talk to us about the economic drivers of sustainability and mechanisms in agri-food systems in Ireland and the EU. Dillon will speak to us about the integration of social indicators in sustainability in the national reporting and assessment. And we'll finish up with John Kelly, the principal of Ballyhaise Agricultural College, and how education in ag has developed and evolved over time, and how we can enhance the knowledge base of sustainability among our young farmers coming into the industry. So as with the other sessions, we'll hear from our three speakers, and then we'll open the floor to questions for a few minutes afterwards. So our first speaker is Trevor Donnellan. Trevor is an economist, and he's the head of the Economics and Farm Survey Department in Teagasc. His work includes economic analysis of agri markets with an emphasis on where agri-trade and environmental policy interact using the FAPRI Ireland model. His work aims to support stakeholders and policy makers both in Ireland and the EU. He's the author of the National Farm Survey Sustainability Report, and he's a member of the Climate Change Advisory Council Carbon Budgeting Working Group. And he also advises the EU Commission as an external expert. So over to you, Trevor.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we had a quite a good run through this morning on environmental sustainability. So we're going to switch our focus now to talk about how we might deliver change, and also in this session we'll be talking about social sustainability. So let's have a run through here and see what we're going to talk about. And my clicker isn't working. So this way? Oh, okay. Okay, so just by way of introduction, what am I going to talk to you about? Well, I'm going to talk to you about a range of different issues. I think we're all well aware now that policy at EU level and policy in Irish agriculture is very much focused now on sustainability. That's seen in the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, the strategic dialogue, and in a whole range of global and national commitments that are out there that the agri-food sector needs to abide by. We've seen probably a focus shift away from economic and social sustainability to greater emphasis on environmental sustainability. But I think we do need to keep in mind that economic and social sustainability, they're necessary in order to deliver on environmental sustainability ultimately. We also need to keep in mind the characteristics of Irish agriculture, and I'll have a slide on that in a while. I think that's a crucial issue in terms of thinking about how we might deliver a more sustainable sector. And I think it's particularly important also that we understand that we're not starting from a blank canvas when we're doing that. We need to deal with the situation as it is and deliver something that's better. I'll talk then about private and public sustainability mechanisms and the pros and cons associated with those. And that will lead me into a bit of a discussion then as well about the stakeholder perspective and recognition that when we look across farmers, the food industry, policymakers and consumers, they may not see the issues here from the same perspective. I'm then briefly going to go through some sustainability mechanisms in operation in other countries and arrive at some tentative conclusions then at the end. So, as I said, we heard a lot already today about environmental sustainability. I just jotted down on this slide what I think are some of the key issues. This is not an exhaustive list, but what are some of the key issues facing Irish agriculture? And if you look at just at the economic component, for example, we will see that the innovation dynamic and the financial strength of the sector varies across the different production systems. And I think that's most obvious when you contrast dairy with beef. We also have a very significant element of part-time farming, which is going to limit the amount of time that individuals have to devote to their agricultural activities. And then we have this aspect that marks us out as a complete outlier in Europe, where we have this very low population density and as a result of that, a very high food export capacity. So this marks us out as being quite different from some of our neighbours. And I've mentioned some of the environmental and social issues here as well. Emma's going to talk in a while about the social dimension. So let's take a look at some of the facts and figures in relation to our economic sustainability in the agriculture sector in Ireland. So what we're looking at here is data on income levels, or average income levels, from the National Farm Survey across the various systems of agriculture. And the distinction you see there is a fairly obvious one, that income levels in dairy farming and tillage farming are generally, at least, a good deal higher than we see in the dry stock systems. We see these large income differentials, and we also see in these slides, particularly in dairy and tillage, quite high levels of income volatility. If we look at the support payments that are delivered to the sector, we see quite a variation here as well, but the variation is more to do with differences in farm size than anything else. Our dairy and tillage farms are typically a good deal larger than our dry stock farms, and that yields the differential that we see here. I'll draw your attention, though, to the table on the right here, which shows us what the level of support payments is as a share of farm income. And this is for data for 2023, which is probably presenting it in its most stark format. And what we see, particularly across the dry stock systems, is that the level of support actually exceeds the income achieved in the sectors. In other words, we have significant loss-making activity going on in our dry stock sector, and because it's the year 2023, the tillage sector fared very poorly by this metric as well. And if we think about it in terms of economic viability, so if we think about the population of farms that we track in the National Farm Survey and how viable they are economically over time, what we can see is that the year 23, because of the low incomes that were achieved, marked a significant downturn in the percentage of farms that we consider to be viable across all the agricultural systems. What you see here is a distinction, obviously, between dairy and tillage and cattle and sheep, but the general trend was a downward one across those systems in 2023 because of the fact that we had a year of very high production costs and nothing too exciting happening from the perspective of output prices. So if I move then to talk about these public and private sustainability mechanisms, what am I even talking about? And you can divide these up into categorizations in a number of different ways. In this particular example here, I've just listed 3 ways of thinking about the private mechanisms and 3 ways of thinking about the public mechanisms. So if you think about private mechanisms, you can think about things like product certification, Origin Green, the quality assurance system we have. It's a private mechanism, we can say, because ultimately what we're hoping here is that the consumer will pay a premium for products with certain attributes at the end of the day. We've got corporate sustainability initiatives, and Deirdre talked a bit about these earlier on in the day. So these can be run by individual food businesses, and they can impose those on their suppliers as well if they have enough power in the overall food chain. And then you have the potential for things like voluntary standards, where an organization can submit itself to be audited to see what the environmental credentials or sustainability credentials of their output actually looks like. On the public mechanism side, then, the most familiar one I guess we have is legislation, where government or EU or whatever enacts regulations that must be followed. We also have then financial incentivization. That's something we're quite familiar with as well. Support for scheme participation, grant aid designed to deliver better sustainability. And then the third one, which is one that you might not think about, financial support for research. I think we have to consider that, whether it's EU money or Irish government money. The financial support for research is an important public mechanism as well that can help to deliver on a more sustainable agri-food sector. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of these different approaches? And again, this isn't an exhaustive list. But if you think about private mechanisms, they can be probably more quickly and easily set up and tweaked than might be the case if we had a public mechanism that's delivered through regulation. They're also self-financing. As I mentioned, we're talking about the taxpayer, we're talking about the consumer paying for these initiatives when they're private mechanisms, because it's about the consumer paying a higher price for products with particular attributes. And they also have an opt-in, opt-out nature. Not every farmer has to sign up to these things. They can choose to be in or to be out of a private sustainability mechanism. Disadvantages, though, of those private mechanisms are important to keep in mind as well. There's a potential for a lack of oversight. Who is actually verifying what these private mechanisms are telling us in terms of the metrics that they're producing? There's also a risk with respect to these metrics that they may reside in terms of short-term goals or objectives. So whatever's flavour of the month in sustainability suddenly becomes the really important thing at a moment in time, and in 2 years' time, the big sustainability initiative can be about something else. And I guess there's also then, in this private mechanism, the risk of greenwashing due to the fact that there is no oversight, and that leads to questions being asked about whether, what's the spin versus the substance to the claims that are being made. At the same time, if we move back over then to our public mechanisms, one of the advantages of those is that you can have blanket coverage. You can insist that everybody involved needs to sign up and participate, if that's something that you wish. With the public mechanisms as well, it's probably more likely that you're going to have long-term consistent objectives around what's attempted to be achieved. And that's because very often the public mechanisms evolve from some international target or nationally specified target that we're trying to direct ourselves towards. And the other advantage of public mechanisms, I guess, is enforceability. These are ultimately systems imposed by government, and inherently there should be an oversight mechanism there to verify what's going on. On the flip side then, if you look at the disadvantages of public mechanisms, developing them can be a slow process. There's a political process involved in developing public mechanisms to address sustainability, and you can end up getting bound up in political red tape, for example, lobbying from different interest groups, etc. There's the burden on the exchequer, because ultimately public mechanisms tend to be funded by the exchequer in terms of delivering supports or whatever you have in mind. And then the final point, our final disadvantage, is that when you're trying to design these mechanisms, there's the risk of unfair or ineffective design. In other words, it can be hard to cater for extreme or unforeseen cases when you're designing a regulation. And that can lead to discontent amongst people who are subject to the regulation. So when we think then about the stakeholders and their perspectives with respect to sustainability, what can we say? And when I'm talking about stakeholders here, I just remind you, I'm talking about farmers, the food industry, policymakers, and consumers. I think they all share a common end goal, in the sense that they accept that long-term sustainability improvement is required across all the dimensions we've been talking about this morning. I think they also recognize there's a burden there in terms of the cost, that there will be a cost in delivering improved sustainability, particularly in the environmental category. And I think there's an awareness that technology is going to be important. New technologies are going to help us to deliver better economic, social, and environmental dividends. So there are areas I think all of these stakeholders can have a shared interest and a common view on. But I think there's areas as well where we will see divergence. And this is where I guess the dialogue needs to take place. If you think about implementation, policymakers like rigid regulations, whereas farmers in the food industry might prefer to see flexible regulations that are more pragmatic, for example. There may be differences across these stakeholder groups as well in terms of the timescales we're thinking about, and depending on which metric you're concerned about. So there might be desire to see progress in the short term versus long-term progress, and that might differ in your perspective, whether you're a farmer or whether you're a policymaker or a consumer, depending on whether your interests are economic sustainability or environmental sustainability or social sustainability. And that leads me into the final point there, that difference of emphasis. Farmers will be concerned for first and foremost, and rightly so, I would say, with their economic survival, whereas policymakers and consumers may be more concerned at this point, I think, with delivery on environmental goals. So with that, I just want to briefly look at what we can see from the point of view of sustainability mechanisms in various countries. I mentioned in Ireland already that we have Origin Green. We have supermarkets supporting local sourcing of food, but the thing we need to keep in mind as well is most of the consumers of Irish food, as Deirdre has pointed out earlier today, are not people living in Ireland. Most of the consumers of Irish-produced food are people in other countries. So with that in mind, how concerned are they going to be about the sustainability of Irish food production? Some of them will, some of them won't. We have CAP-based supports to try to help deliver on sustainability, and we have seen a recent focus particularly on quantifiable environmental targets in terms of delivering on environmental sustainability. Interestingly, though, we don't have any economic targets around sustainability or social targets around sustainability. So that's a little bit of an unbalanced playing field from that point of view. Looking to our nearest neighbour in the UK, post-Brexit, they do to some extent feel like that they need to repaint the canvas, and there is an increased emphasis in the UK on performance-based environmental payments, well, at least in England anyway. Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland are probably going to stick closer to something that's more like the CAP. We've got very powerful supermarkets in the UK. Most of the UK food output is sold through UK supermarkets, so it's understandable on that basis that UK supermarkets can have exert a strong degree of control about what happens in the sector from the perspective of sustainability. And we have labelling mechanisms in the UK, such as the red tractor label and carbon labelling. And then moving to France, we see there support for biodiversity and organic farming coming from government, fair pricing legislation as well coming from government, and then from the private sector, an emphasis on local and organic sourcing of foods by supermarkets. Germany, organic agriculture and renewable energy are two of the things that kind of stand out there from a public policy perspective. And at the supermarket level, we see a focus on sourcing of local products, and eco-labelling and organic certification are also perceived as important. The Netherlands, circular agriculture is a big thing there from a public policy perspective. Netherlands had a very controversial nitrogen emission reduction policy, which has led to all kinds of complications over the last few years and is probably an example of very bad politics. So we can maybe talk about that in the Q&A. And also there's a lot of work in the Netherlands around supermarket partnerships with sustainable farmers. So to conclude, what I would say is that public and private sustainability mechanisms are common internationally, at least across the bunch of countries that I've looked at. And I chose them because they're our nearest neighbours and they're significant markets for our food as well. Those public and private mechanisms have strengths and weaknesses. We need to be clear on that as well. And we also need to be clear that stakeholders are not going to share the same perspective necessarily around some aspects of sustainability. So there's a need for dialogue to try to address those kinds of issues. A mixed approach involving public and private mechanisms seem to be what's widely used across Europe. And I think what we ultimately need to keep in mind here in the end is to achieve some level of balance between economic, social, and environmental sustainability. Fixing environmental sustainability is highly desirable, but not at the expense of creating additional problems with respect to economic and social sustainability. So I think that's why we need that concerted, holistic view of what the actual problems are. So the exclusive pursuit of one objective may exacerbate the other challenges, is my final remark. So with that, and I've probably gone a couple of minutes of overtime, which I apologize for, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Trevor, for an excellent presentation. So I'd like to invite Emma Dillon to the stage. Emma is going to speak to us on incorporating the social dimension into assessing sustainability. Emma is an economist and a senior research officer with the Teagasc National Farm Survey Department. She has a broad role involved in survey design, the analysis of data, and reporting key trends in agriculture. Through policy modelling and at farm level, some of her key focus areas are measuring sustainability for policy and evaluation, and also the structural changes in Irish farms over time. Emma has been centrally involved in the development of the social sustainability metrics for farmers and for broader society to be included in the National Farm Survey. And those metrics will be further developed through Emma's involvement in the Measure and Gen Farm projects, which are funded by the Department of Agriculture. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to give you a brief outline of what I'm going to speak about during my presentation. So first of all, the policy context and the policy landscape in which we're now operating. Then I'll try to define social sustainability and give you an overview of what we mean by social sustainability, the measurement challenges that lie therein, because it is a very diverse and broad area. Then I'll try and give you an overview of social data inclusion in the National Farm Survey, the developments that we have made over the last decade in particular, and a brief insight into some of the data and the results of that. Finally, then, some conclusions and future work. So the holistic nature of sustainability is increasingly reflected in policy, both inside and outside the EU and inside and outside agriculture. So we've heard lots of mention this afternoon of the Farm to Fork and the European Green Deal. And also we think about the multidimensional objectives of the current CAP. And if we think about the 10 objectives, we can see that the objectives relate to economic, environmental, and social sustainability, with the 10th around knowledge and innovation. So the social sustainability elements are around food and health, rural areas, and generational renewal, with the overall general objective of improving life in rural areas. And I suppose just to be cognizant as well of the multifaceted nature of a just transition and the need for balance across those three dimensions. And I suppose to date, least attention has been given to social sustainability, but the UN Sustainable Development Goals have been particularly pivotal in accentuating social sustainability and underscoring the importance of human well-being, equity, and social inclusion in sustainable development and in the development of suitable policy frameworks. So we've heard Trevor's parting comment there about the need for balance, but we know that balancing dimensions is a real challenge. And interestingly, the recent EU Strategic Dialogue on Agriculture talks about the importance of the three pillars of sustainability and underlines the fact that they can themselves be reinforcing. And indeed, that's a guiding principle of the dialogue. We heard a nice overview from Deirdre this morning from the Board BIA perspective in terms of the reporting requirements that are there. So within the CAP, in terms of the Common Monitoring and Evaluation Framework across Member States, and also social conditionality and the importance of labour rights and the structures that are there for workers in terms of farm work, and also the CSRD, which we have discussed in some detail. So I think all of these reporting requirements emphasise the importance of achieving a social sustainability and addressing social issues in the pursuit of economic and environmental objectives more broadly. So briefly then, the EU Farm Sustainability Data Network is currently underway, and this is involving the move from the EU Farm Accountancy Data Network to take account of this more holistic concept of sustainability, and the National Farm Survey is part of that. So what do we mean by social sustainability, or how do we define it? There's no real one definition of sustainability itself, nor indeed social sustainability, but I do like this one. And it's from Donnellan in 2018, and it says that it means specifying and managing both positive and negative impacts of systems, processes, organisations and activities on people and social life. So I think that's it in a nutshell. It's people at its core meeting human needs now and in the future. And I suppose this is important in the context of a just transition, because insights in terms of social sustainability and the institutional and social context in which people are operating will give us a better overview of their capacity to change and to undertake citizen actions and indeed undertake environmentally sustainable practices if we're thinking about farmers, and in the context of behavioural change, for example. So it's a very broad area, but there are aspects relating to both the individual and wider society. And we can refer to these as being both internal and external. So if we refer to the internal, we think about farmer well-being, the working conditions on farms, education and training, and then access to services for those farm families. And more broadly then, we think about rural viability and development, issues around generational renewal, diversity and inclusion, and also animal welfare. So a very broad remit. There are lots of measurement challenges, and these are well articulated in the literature. First of all, we're challenged by the diverse range of topics and aspects that we need to take account of and therefore collect data on. Also the fact that there is a certain amount of subjectivity around social metrics, and they're harder to quantify, for example, than some of the environmental or economic metrics. Sensitivity around certain subject areas, for example, farmer mental health and well-being, farm succession, and also the data collection burden. How often do we need to collect data on these types of issues? And how do we adapt existing mechanisms, like something like the National Farm Survey, the FADN, to take account of these? And these were all discussions that were had in recent months around the transition to the Farm Sustainability Data Network. And these challenges were very much outlined by the Member States. And so we know it's a very complex and costly exercise to expand the data collection to take account of this. We've also touched on the idea of trade-offs and synergies, and that is a real issue. And this challenge of balancing across the three dimensions. I'll touch on this again in a few moments. So there's a nice literature review in the paper, and it talks about the data gaps that are there and the need to adjust our data collection mechanisms and to involve stakeholders in terms of priority areas. So what progress have we made in terms of the National Farm Survey? So on an annual basis then, we have for a long time reported data on farm household socio-demographics. So the age profile, marital status, household composition, off-farm employment, and the hours worked on and off-farm, and also the agricultural training of the farmer. And I suppose not to dwell on these, our sustainability report was launched last week, but we have seen the hours worked on farms creeping up, particularly on the dairy farms, post-milk quota abolition, and we have seen an increasing phenomenon of the farmer and the spouse working off-farm. So that has worked well in terms of a diversification strategy when income is in a poor situation as last year, but it does ask questions around the sustainability of that in terms of the social aspects. More recently then, we have also undertaken additional surveys on an annual basis looking at special focus areas around social sustainability. So farmer health and safety, we've undertaken this, and accidents on farms in the last number of years, farmer well-being, succession, IT, and access to services, and indeed the role of women on farms. We also have published a number of small farm surveys, and in those we talk about the motivation of those farmers and their future farm plans. So the recent report was published in the spring, and it had some interesting information around farm plans, around succession, and also the openness of farmers to diversify and their interest in, for example, organics, agri-environmental schemes. So all of those give us an insight into the social context of our farms. We've made some progress also in terms of PhD work by Mary Brennan, and she categorised the metrics that we have, the variables that we have in the National Farm Survey, into farmer, community and animal well-being. And within that, we also engaged with stakeholders to try and prioritise important variables and indicators. One paper we looked at was the creation of a Farmer Sustainability Index, and this categorised some of the data we had in the Farm Survey into 3 pillars: farm business continuity, community and social connections, and farmer comfort and quality of life. There are various variables there feeding into that, and there's also described in the paper. In terms of an overall summary and in terms of an overall conclusion from that work, we found that cattle and sheep farmers and those aged over 60 performed less well in terms of their social sustainability. These trade-offs that I mentioned, we found that dairy farmers had a better economic viability, but they were more likely to be stressed and had a poorer work-life balance in terms of those hours worked. Conversely, we found that sheep farmers had a better work-life balance, but there were greater levels of economic vulnerability. So therein lies the challenge in finding that balance across those pillars. We also found regional differences in that the southwest and the border regions had less access to services and more economic vulnerability. A second aspect of our work is around farmer well-being, and we asked the question in 2018 and in 2021 as to whether or not farmers were experiencing stress on their farms. And so the 2021 data revealed that almost 4 in 10 farmers experienced stress relating to their farm over that previous 5-year period, and that this had deteriorated over time. Levels of stress were highest on dairy farms. It is important to say that this was a particularly challenging period on those farms with quota abolition and the expansion, also some weather difficulties in 2018. And so we saw that in terms of asking about the triggers of those stress levels, we found that they related to the poor weather in 2018, that excessive workload, and also the economic viability and the difficulties that farmers experienced in that year. There's also been other work done by colleagues inside Teagasc and also in UCD and DCU, looking at mental health and farmer mental health, and the role of knowledge transfer advisors and other supports. There was a HSE report around this in recent years. So there is a real focus of attention and there is an emerging literature in this regard. Another aspect of social sustainability centres around animal welfare. And in looking at the data we had in the National Farm Survey, we looked at some of the literature which focused on the use of routinely collected herd data. And we tried to see what could we use within the survey that would give us some indication, a proxy for animal welfare. So there was a paper in 2011 by De Vries et al. Which identified 3 dimensions around production intensity, milk production and composition, and management and facilities. And therefore we selected this list of variables from the National Farm Survey, which gave us an indication of welfare levels on those farms. The analysis indicated that welfare standards based on these variables remained stable over the period 2014 to 17, despite that structural change which I described a few moments ago. And indeed that those farms who had expanded over that period performed relatively better in terms of the welfare relating to these selected metrics. We found there was positive correlations between welfare standards and economic and environmental performance, showing the potential there of win-win strategies, or indeed win-win-win strategies, to improve sustainability. So that there is that potential for balance across those dimensions, if you like. So it does beg the question around the subjectivity of composite indicators, and this is very much covered in the literature, that there is this subjectivity in terms of selecting metrics, variables and indicators and telling a particular story. Generation renewal was another issue of particular interest, and we know from the latest census that 1/3 of farm holders in Ireland are aged over 65, and that's up from about a quarter in 1991. And only 7% of farmers were aged less than 35, and again, a deterioration over that period. So within the survey, we asked the question if farmers had identified a successor and had they discussed this with them. And the latest data on that was from our 2023 survey, which showed that 6 in 10 farmers aged over 60 have identified a successor, and this was a decline on the levels in 2018, as you can see. So a mixed picture across the systems. We're undertaking ongoing research in this area. We have a PhD in conjunction with MOCRA looking at the drivers and barriers to succession north and south, and we're undertaking qualitative interviews in this regard. And we've also undertaken some analysis through the Renew project in recent years with other colleagues. An interesting question as well was around how long farmers had managerial control of their farms. And we asked this in the National Farm Survey last year and also in the Small Farm Survey. And you can see there that 3/4 of farmers had managerial control for more than 20 years. The figure was a little lower on the small farms. But this just points to this problem around delayed succession, which we're aware of. We asked farmers about their social contact outside their household. Not to dwell too much, but you can see from the bars on the bottom, this relates to 2018, you can see the proportion of farmers across the systems that had daily contact with people outside their household, and this declined across all categories in 2021. We would see that as a COVID impact, and this was particularly evident on the sheep farmers, given their older age profile. Mindful of time, so just to conclude then, that there is this growing recognition of the importance of social issues in achieving broader sustainability goals. A guiding principle of the new strategic dialogue is around reinforcing those dimensions. But the difficulties we have are around data collection and the challenges there are in measuring that and in taking account of this very broad-ranging area. I think it's important to point out the potential of linking data sources from elsewhere, and for example, administrative data sources. And I'm thinking here particularly around animal welfare and antibiotic use. This is something that we would find very difficult to collect through the National Farm Survey, but if we had access to this through the Animal Medicines Register, for example, we would be able then to get a much better insight in terms of animal welfare, which is part of this whole social sustainability measure within the survey. I think finally then to make the point that there is a key role for stakeholders in the design of suitable survey instruments and knowledge exchange, and this is built into a number of research projects which have just started, the Measure and Gen Farms project, which Tom mentioned, and also within the AgNav. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. Finally, to acknowledge the voluntary cooperation of the NFS farmers, the data collection team, administrators and analysts, research collaborators within Teagasc and outside, and also the Teagasc Walsh Scholarship Programme, which really, I suppose, kick-started a lot of this work in the last 5 or 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for a very interesting presentation. So I will maybe call on John Kelly, our final speaker in this session, to speak to us about driving change through education. So John has had a long career in Teagasc. He's currently the principal of Ballyhaise Agricultural College and formerly the principal of Clonakilty, and started out maybe his career in Kildalton. John has, I suppose, led the expansion of education programs in Ballyhaise from seven courses up to 11 courses, and the college caters for over 800 students annually. There's a big focus on sustainability in agriculture through the level 5 and level 6 courses, and also with the collaboration with DKIT and up to level 8. And I suppose John has also spearheaded investments and key investments in Ballyhaise College to modernise the facilities and make sure that our students are getting the best learning experience they can in modern times. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Tom. Maybe before I get into my slides, just was 2 things I'd like to say. First of all, my job and my colleagues' job in education, and it's a wonderful job. It's fabulous that we get to talk to a much younger audience than we have here today generally. And indeed, yesterday I was talking to a group of 11-year-olds in our local town national school that know nothing about agriculture, and talked for an hour about what I'll be talking about today, and probably got much more challenging questions from our young people They're very open to change and just need the tools and mechanisms to meet the challenges that we have. I suppose second, on a lighter note, on the day that's in it, I'd just like to thank Stephen and Declan that my mic's working. Okay, so the couple of topics that I want to talk about, I suppose, first one is a little bit of a history lesson about agriculture and sustainability. 2, the need for change. 3, the role of education in driving change. And the 4th area, integrating research with education, before I conclude and talk about maybe some of the barriers that we have. Okay, our history, our Teagasc history stems back to the Department of Agricultural and Technical Instruction, which was formed in 1799. And that might sound like a long time ago, but in the terms of the crisis that we live through at the minute regarding sustainability and biodiversity, it's a mere blink of an eye. At that stage, we'd just been through a very turbulent history. We were in the back of the catastrophic famine that we had in the mid-1800s. We had the various land acts then through the late 1800s, where our tenant farmers were able to purchase back their land, which was facilitated by the acts from Westminster. We were still part of the United Kingdom. I suppose if you look at the population of England at that time, it was just on the back of the Industrial Revolution, and its population had tripled, although ours had collapsed. That was still a very important market for our produce and our economy, which again, from the previous presentations, stands to this day. So I suppose it was in the interest of our country at that stage to make sure that we looked at agriculture. And we set up the Department of Agricultural and Technical Instruction with sustainability as a core principle of the department. At that stage, really, I suppose, social sustainability because of the crisis that we've been through and the change in land ownership was important to address, but more importantly, the area of economic sustainability for our industry, to make sure that our farmers were equipped with the latest technologies and skills and training to make them better farmers and more efficient farmers. And that's a core function that stands to this day. The college that I work in was set up in the back of that in 1906 to train farmers across from the northern half of the country. The farm also supported research at a very early stage, particularly on breeds and genetics. They mightn't have had all the names that we have for it now, and also on crops. And indeed, a lot of our research farms that were set up at that stage in 1906 carry out trials on crops and variety testing to this day. So I suppose that history context is really important. My point is that sustainability is a core function of our purpose. We've already heard that it's a three-legged stool. And what I want to show today is that we're just shifting our weight on that stool to the sustainability leg and to get that balance that's more suitable for the times that we live in. The message, I suppose, the need for change, it's not something I have to sell overly hard to our students. I suppose the urgency for sustainable practices due to climate change and biodiversity loss, to explain to them about the risks posed by not adopting change in our farming methods to our soil health, our water quality, our greenhouse gas emissions, all which have been eloquently explained today. And then to explain to them about the benefits of adopting these sustainable practices. And I just have a few graphs to show. This is our colleagues in Northern Ireland produced this table last year. And the graph, I suppose, if we just pick out Ireland, the green is what we don't want. That's where they have very, very little training. What we ideally want is we want all our students to have the red full agricultural training, or the pink or the beige colour where they have basic training. And we're pretty good. We're certainly very good on our formal agricultural education training. But I suppose when you look at countries like France, we have room for improvement, which is an important message. We just heard a talk about the sustainability survey that Teagasc conducts each year, and I've just taken out one of the tables from that report. The latest report came out a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to show, and I suppose maybe not to hone in on the percentages, but to hone in on the trend. So the amount of education that our farmers have has improved, so just below 50% in 2015, and we're heading now to 60% of our farmers being trained. And again, my presentation is not a talk about the merits of training. It's, I suppose, to show that we're improving the amount of people that have achieved training in our sector. Our education's broad in Teagasc, and I suppose sometimes people don't realise how broad it is. So on the left-hand side of that table, we have our further education. So I like to describe further education as our farmers. Those are the people that will go back inside the farm gate and run our farms in the future. And we have our 3 agricultural colleges and our College of Horticulture. Then we assist and partner with 3 private colleges. But also now we all have ETBs, Education and Training Boards, in Wexford, Galway, Mayo, delivering agricultural education. And we've one private provider delivering part-time education in Tipperary. Then on the right-hand side, we have our degrees, and we have our technological universities and IoTs listed there, and we have our universities. And in many cases, Teagasc partner with those institutions. The people with degrees, a small number of them go back farming, but the majority of them will become professionals in the sector. Our numbers are flat, but buoyant. The last time our economy was in this situation, our numbers collapsed. I always think that's very encouraging that we've maintained our numbers this time around, and I would like to think it's a more sustainable future for the graduates coming out into the industry. The message that I would like to explain now is about our organisation, Teagasc, and a lot of people here will know that we have our advisory, our research and education. And that is really important for our ag industry, that we integrate cutting-edge research into our educational programs. Collaboration with stakeholders for real-world applications, that we also do that in our colleges. And the different parts of Teagasc work together to implement the technologies that we need going forward and to get them as quickly as possible inside the farm gate. So I have a couple of case studies just to illustrate my point. So if we look at the area of pasture management, I suppose just to take a step back, normally in an educational institution, they can be quite cumbersome, particularly when it comes to change. Large educational organizations have an academic process to follow, and typically every 5 years they will review the curriculum. And that's assuming they know what has to go onto the curriculum. In Teagasc, because our colleagues are the researchers that are coming up with new technologies, means that we hear it at our in-service training and that we're able to adjust our curriculum really quickly. So if we look at the area of pasture management, so pasture-based was a technology that came for measuring grass, to making sure that we utilize the grass very effectively and that it's not wasted. Very quickly, we had to put that into our programs, and that was put into our level 6 or second-year program, pasture grassland management. And it's a tool that's used now with all our students. And it was used very quickly after the tool became available. If we weren't part of the research side of the organisation, we mightn't have adopted that as quickly. The second one then is the inclusion of clover. So clover was trialled very effectively in plot level in our research centre in Moore Park. Then in 2012, it was put onto one of our college farms in Clonakilty. And we very quickly learned that from a whole farm perspective, that it was going to reduce the amount of chemical nitrogen that we needed on our pasture and still maintain grass production. We also were able to roll that out subsequently in our farm in Ballyhaise. So then we could incorporate that into our grassland production module at level 5, that we could show the skills of growing and managing clover in our curriculum pretty much straight away. Like as soon as we got that research rolled out in Clonakilty, we were able to apply it in our programs. That just wouldn't happen if we weren't part of the one organisation. The second case study I would talk about is our Sustainable Farming and Environment module. This is a catch-all module, you could say, at level 6. And I suppose the message I have today is things like that have been explained today, like our 8 actions for farming for water, or our signpost program. These initiatives come up, and we need people to adopt them quickly. But when we have a module in level 6, particularly on sustainable farming module, whether it's these practices and environmental regulations, they can be put onto that module, whether it's climate action strategies that we need to implement that haven't been covered in other modules that can be put into this module. And then also we have practical applications from farm audits, from a biodiversity audit perspective, or maybe some of the schemes that have changed from reps to glass to acres, that we can put those schemes straight into the module and not wait 5 years for the next time for the curriculum to be updated. I suppose just to finish off, the challenges are clear, and we need to adopt onto our programs quickly the technologies that we need to meet our targets. And then we need to maintain our collaboration with our IoTs and technical universities and universities with regards to our curriculum on their degree courses. And then we have to engage with the other providers that we don't have direct contact with, the ETBs and the private providers, to make sure that their curriculum is dynamic and changes in line with practices. I suppose just to finish off, coming last, I wasn't sure about coming last, but I suppose the one opportunity that coming last gives is to hear all the previous presentations and to sense the tone of the room. And there's one question a gentleman at the back asked, which children ask me all the time: what are we going to do about the crisis that we live in? When's the change going to happen? I would say, if you look at history, that you could argue that this whole crisis started on these islands back in the 1700s. But now we have a country full of smart people and farmers that are enthusiastic and love what they're doing, that are eager to change, and that we'll develop the technologies to show the world and lead the world that we can have sustainable food production. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. John, you might join me here, and I'll invite Trevor and Emma back up to the stage maybe, and we might have a short question and answer session. So we have a roving mic in the room with Mirren, so if anybody has any questions for either Trevor or Emma or John, we'd be happy to take them. We have a question here, just here in front. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Rubina. I'm from Agri-Land. I have a question for Trevor. You mentioned that there's no targets in place for social or economic sustainability. Considering this, can we reach environmental sustainability without even having those targets in the other two pillars?
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. I think it'll be, if you have no economic or social targets, then I think it makes it very easy to imagine a scenario where you could achieve environmental sustainability, because you might be completely unconcerned about the implications for economic or social sustainability. So from that point of view, you could take a view that it would actually make it easier to achieve environmental sustainability if you've no quantifiable objective around what you want to achieve economically or socially.
But what about the funding? You mentioned the funding, obviously, for all those measures to support farmers to take on those actions.
I'm not sure I follow your question.
Sorry, I just mentioned the funding that's required to support farmers to take on those actions.
Yes, I did, yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, I mean, we do need, that's something that's, there's a shared view, I think, around stakeholders, that it will cost money to enhance the environmental sustainability of agriculture. I think there is a good appreciation of that. But I think that's funding that may address the costs associated with improving environmental sustainability without necessarily improving economic or social sustainability.
Hi, Trevor. I just wanted to ask you a question. Maybe I'm misremembering, but did you posit that environmental, economic sustainability and environmental sustainability were kind of almost incompatible?
No.
And what I kind of got from what you were saying was that there's an imbalance. But in the last few years, we've just seen such severe impacts on farming from weather, from climate. And my concern is that climate and the extremes that we're seeing will take out more farms than any regulation will. I mean, we've seen really tough years. So, do you not think they're more linked now?
I don't know. I think time will tell. I think it's difficult to extrapolate from past events in terms of what their economic consequences will be. That's one of the concerns I would have, because we don't take into account adaptation and how farmers might adapt to change. I mean, we're talking about You're kind of referencing extreme weather events, but I mean, if we think about what we're told will happen from a broader perspective in terms of climate change, we need to take into consideration a lot of different issues, including what the impact will be like on other countries. So it's a hugely complex issue. So whether, I can't say to you, because we don't have the research done, I can't say to you whether addressing the issue of environmental sustainability will necessarily lead to enhanced economic sustainability.
They are linked.
They are linked, but whether the linkage is positive or negative is another matter.
Okay, Tom here. Yeah.
Thanks. Tom O'Dwyer, Signpost Programme. Question for Emma and probably Trevor as well. From Emma's presentation, you referred to the Farmer Sustainability Index, and if I interpreted the slide correctly, that was a measure of social sustainability. But I suppose the graphic just got me thinking. Has there been any thinking in terms of trying to pull together all the strands of sustainability into one overall sustainability metric? So pulling together the economic, the social, and the environmental, so that a farmer can see maybe how well balanced they are between the three measures and maybe an overall score as well.
Yes, Tom, there has, and indeed we did it ourselves early on in our looking at this. I guess the main challenge is around the selection of indicators, the selection of variables, and then how you weight those in terms of importance. So there's a lot of literature around composite indicators, as they're referred to, and that's the key challenge, really. It's the kind of subjectivity of them, and I think my mic is giving a bit of feedback, the weighting of them. And I think we haven't really squared that circle just yet.
If I could come in on that as well. I think it's also a potentially controversial issue because it opens up the potential for progress in one particular metric to offset the lack of progress or a regression, we'll say, in another metric. So some people I think people coming in from an environmental perspective would have concerns about that you could have a metric, a collective metric that might improve the economic and be based on improvements in economic and social sustainability and regression in environmental sustainability, but in the aggregate, it looked like everything had improved, if you follow me. So it's, but I think another point you made, or else maybe it was somebody else in a recent discussion, is that as soon as you produce one of those aggregated metrics, the first question you get asked is, what caused the change in the aggregate metric? And then you're back to the discussion of the individual metrics and how they're moving. Yeah.
There's a question here.
Hi, Matt Hornsby from Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. I wanted to ask about the concept of just transition. We've just put a Just Transition Commission in place, and the National Economic and Social Council had a report out last year on just transition in agriculture. But then you also come across people saying, does this concept really apply? Because we're not necessarily talking about a transition here from one sector to another or one economic activity to another. It's just making agriculture more sustainable. So, I'm just wondering about your views. Is that a useful concept, just transition in agriculture? And if so, what might it mean? How might we achieve it?
I'm happy to
go on,
comment on that. I think it is relevant. I mean, historically, at an EU level at least anyway, just transition was, if I remember well, largely about addressing issues in fossil fuel industry. I think that's where it kind of came from originally, and the transition away from fossil fuels. But I think certainly it has relevance in an Irish context. I mean, to this point, in an Irish context, it has, well, in my knowledge anyway, at least, focused a lot around the peat stations and their decommissioning. But there would be a need to look at it from the perspective of agriculture. And I think it is possible to talk about a just transition where people remain in agriculture, but they're doing something that's significantly different. I mean, the just transition, in the end, is about recognizing that a disproportionate element of the burden of our transition is falling on certain citizens in society and compensating them for that. I mean, the big issue around climate change and resolving it is that there are winners and losers, and the losers feel that they're not being compensated adequately by society, and hence their opposition. So, I mean, by better supporting a transition in agriculture, I think you could find it more easy to actually deliver change within agriculture. So I think it certainly is relevant, and I'm glad to see that that's there now on the table.
I agree. I think those dimensions are so multifaceted that the framework around economic, environmental and social is made to see how citizens and farm households react to that, and that's very evident from the strategic dialogue as well.
Okay. I think we'll hold it, Tim. Maybe there'll be a forum later, and maybe we can pick up on other questions then. I just want to thank our three speakers for three excellent presentations. And I think what's quite obvious out of this is that bringing the social element of sustainability into it, measuring it, is quite complex. And also John's presentation on the importance of education and shifting the dial with the young farmers who are the future of the industry, and having them coming into the industry with, you know, economic, obviously, which was always a driver, but more environmental and the social side of things incorporated into their education program. So, you know, hugely important to the future. So I want to thank everybody, and you might give them a round of applause. Thank you.